that's how you really see me, then I guess I don't belong here anymore.
Ever since the release of its first season back in October of 2018, it didn't take long for Legacies to become one of the most popular supernatural franchises in the history of the CW network, with some fans even preferring it to the critically acclaimed Vampire Diaries. And with an incredible selection of cast accompanied by some of the best storytelling from this generation of cinema, it won't surprise you to hear that Season 4 of the series is highly anticipated. But what do we actually know about the behind-the-scenes workings of the show? And how are they able to give such amazing performances where CGI was so heavily utilized? Before we get into it, make sure to leave a like and subscribe with notifications on so you don't miss out on any of the new videos we post. Number 1. Those unfortunate fairy wings. For those of you who don't know, Legacy is a show that relies heavily on virtual effects, which makes sense considering just how many supernatural creatures have appeared alongside our favorite cast members. But since it's a spin-off of a spin-off, it must be said that the franchise doesn't exactly have the high-intensity budget that we see being handed to shows like Stranger Things and Game of Thrones. It shouldn't surprise you to hear that the showrunners have been facing quite a bit of criticism as a result of this. Probably one of the worst-looking creatures in the history of the Legacies universe came in the form of the fairies, who looked very similar to human beings, but differed in that they possessed a pair of wings that could often be hidden from those who didn't know that they were fairies. Unfortunately for the show, though, when it came time to show off these magnificent appendages for the first time, the budget had already run dry. Rather than cutting ties with the creatures and amending the story so that the creatures never had wings in the first place, though, the showrunners went full steam ahead on the design, resulting in some shoddy work, which is still rubbing some fans the wrong way. A particularly poor moment saw one of the head fairies reveal his wings for the first time, which appeared to come out of nowhere and rise from what he assumed to be his back. In an attempt to make the scene a bit more believable, a practical set of fairy wings were actually worn by the actor on set and looked very similar to the butterfly wings you would buy for your niece's next fairy party. That being said, the virtual effects department were then asked to set in to change things in post-production. As we mentioned earlier, though, the budget just wasn't big enough to make these stand-in wings appear more realistic. All the VFX department could really do is place a glittery filter over the image of the cast member and push up the exposure of the film around the wings in question. They were also able to erase the wings from the picture and make them appear as if they were sliding up from the back of the fairy. Unfortunately for fans, though, this was not enough to hide the poor quality of the fairy wings, which looked far too similar to the practical stand-in wings that were used on set. And when compared to the wings of the other supernatural creatures on the show, there's really no doubt that more could be done to bring the fairies into light. Number 2, training just to fight. Another incredible behind-the-scenes secret that may surprise a great number of Legacy fans is just how many of the cast members prefer to do their own stunts. It may be true that a number of their fighting scenes are heavily influenced by virtual effects artists on the payroll, but when it comes to the fight choreography necessary to pull these scenes off, the cast members don't rely on outside help. The process does, however, require a lot of work before the cast members are able to show up and perform on set. First off, a fight choreographer is brought on to discuss exactly what is required from a specific scene. Once the overall story has been communicated to the choreographer, a team of stunt men and women work together to create a fight that would be easy enough for our actors to learn. Once done, the concept is shown to the director, who decides whether he would like any changes to be made. And when the director is finally happy with what he has been shown, it's up to the stunt choreographer and his team of stunt men and women to show the cast exactly how they should be moving. This includes everything from how blades should be carried to how to sell a hit. The cast then spends ages trying to learn this choreography as best they can, so when the time arrives to perform on set, they're ready to go. It must also be said that the production crew have a lot to do with the success of the fight. As it turns turns out, the cameramen and women are responsible for selling the fight just as much as their cast members are, using camera trickery to ensure that it looks like the characters on screen are actually hitting one another. The props department also has a pretty massive role to play in it all. You can't get hit time after time again and show no physical effects after all. This is why the makeup department does their best to replicate injuries with the use of blush, while the props department runs in to add some fake blood to bring the fight together. Like the originals and the Vampire Diaries before it, this fake blood is still a combination of corn syrup, starch, and red food coloring, making it quite tasty at the end of the day. And as we mentioned before, the virtual effects team then has to step it up when it comes to post-production, adding effects when they're needed. A great example is where the telekinetic powers of a character are being used to throw arrows towards a target. Since this cannot be replicated in the real world, it's the VFX guys who work their magic and make this action appear as realistic as possible. The cast members, on the other hand, are told precisely what is going to be inserted so they can imagine the effect taking place while they are acting out the scene. Who knew that so much work went into these little scenes? Number 3, the vampire eye effect. The third behind-the-scenes secret on our list is one that has been a mystery ever since it was first shown on the Vampire Diaries. But since fans fell in love with the effect all those years ago, the showrunners thought it would be great to bring it back in Legacies. We are, of course, referring to that incredible vampire eye effect that has become so prominent in the franchise. For those of you who don't know, vampires in the series look very similar to what you would expect a regular human being to look. But when they get angry or lust for blood, things change. Their eyes begin to glow a different color depending on the type of vampire they are, and the veins below their eyes begin to bulge out of their faces. It's a pretty scary effect, which perfectly sums up the fact that vampires are monsters. And since they are all so attractive, it goes without saying that this fact is often forgotten, making the vampire eye effect incredibly important when it comes to reminding us who we are dealing with. What the showrunners actually do to simulate this effect may surprise you though. Each and every vampire that is about to experience the effect is asked to act with some motion dots painted on their face. After generating some 3D mapping of the facial skin of that actor or actress, the VFX department then runs the mapping through a modulator, which allows the vein effect to match the various facial movements of that actor in the particular scene. Without the mapping of the facial structure of the actor, the effect in question would look painted on and give off a terribly false impression. Last but not least, the virtual effects department goes ahead and changes the eye color of the vampire in question, which is as simple as selecting a different option on a random character generator. Once this look is complete, all that's left is the removal of the motion dots, which happens in the blink of an eye. And just like that, the vampire eye effect is complete. Number 4, bringing the gargoyle to life. But it must be said that not everything on the show is completely CGI. In fact, one of the best monster designs to ever feature was 100% practical, which will most certainly surprise some of you. We are, of course, referring to the gargoyle that first appeared in episode 2 of the first season. As it turns out, this monster was actually being played by an actor named Cheetah Platt, who towered above the rest of the cast members at 1.93 meters in height. Platt was then kitted out in a fully formed monster suit of the gargoyle, which was apparently one of the most uncomfortable experiences the actor has ever had on set. Just imagine how hot the suit must have been, especially considering how much work the gargoyle had to put in when it came to the fight against the other cast members. The practicality of the monster made things a lot easier for the cast, who obviously found it a lot easier to act without having to visualize what the particular monster would look like. But since it was one of the first monsters to ever be created, it was more of a stress test for the showrunners than anything else. And while the virtual effects department was essentially called in during post-production to clean some scenes up, it must be said that the gargoyle was left untouched except for a few minor adjustments. Why we haven't seen more practical monsters since then, we have no idea though, as the gargoyle remains one of the best. What do you think about these behind-the-scenes secrets though? Be sure to let us know in the comment section down below.